Tonight is the 16th of July, in the year 2025. Yet my mind drifts back through time to a small village nestled deep within the Korean mountains. It was the heart of the Joseon dynasty. Here, life was governed by the rhythm of the seasons and the ancient spirits of the land. The village was a cluster of thatched roof houses, clinging to the hillside like stubborn mushrooms. The surrounding forest was a dense wall of green, where pine trees stood like ancient sentinels. Their needles whispered secrets on the wind. The villagers knew the forest held both life and danger. It gave them wood for their fires and herbs for their remedies. But it also housed shadows that danced just beyond the firelight, and sounds that chilled the soul on moonless nights. A palpable tension settled over the community as dusk painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and faded orange. The familiar sounds of the evening, the chirping of crickets, the lowing of a tethered ox, the soft murmur of families finishing their meals, were swallowed by an encroaching silence. Then it began. A faint, rhythmic thudding. It was a sound that did not belong to the natural world. It was not the sound of a woodpecker or a falling stone. It was the sound of a drum, beaten with a slow, deliberate cadence that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the dark woods. The villagers froze, their spoons hovering over their rice bowls, their eyes wide with a shared, unspoken fear. The sound was a harbinger, a warning that something ancient and malevolent was awake. The drumming grew louder, more insistent. It echoed off the granite faces of the mountains, a heartbeat that pulsed with a sinister energy. It was the sound of Chang-Gwi. No one had seen the ghost, not truly, but everyone knew its presence by this sound. The elders would pull their blankets tighter, their faces grim masks in the flickering lamplight. They warned the children to stay inside, to bar the doors and stuff rags in the cracks of the windows. The drums were a call, they said, a summons for the lost and the unwary. To hear them was to be marked. To follow them was to be lost forever, swallowed by the forest and the sorrowful spirit that roamed within it. Each beat of the distant drum was a story, a dark folktale come to life. It spoke of a restless soul, one bound to the forest by a terrible injustice. The sound seeped through the wooden walls and paper screens of the homes, a ghostly intrusion into the warmth of the living. It was a reminder that the world of spirits was not separate from their own. It was right outside, pressing in, waiting for a moment of weakness. The villagers huddled together, their fear a tangible thing, a cold blanket that offered no comfort. They prayed to their ancestors for protection, their whispered pleas a fragile shield against the relentless, percussive dread that came from the deep, dark pines. In the largest house, where the village elder sat surrounded by flickering candles, the story of Chang-Gwi was told anew. His voice was a dry rasp, like leaves skittering across frozen ground. He spoke not to entertain, but to warn. The younger generation needed to understand the weight of the sound that haunted their nights. He explained that Chang-Gwi was not just any ghost. It was a specific kind of spirit, a gawai, born of a violent and tragic death. It was the soul of a person who had been killed and devoured by a tiger. Such a death was considered unnatural, a tear in the fabric of fate, and it created a spirit consumed by a powerful, lingering resentment. The elder's tale painted a chilling picture. A Chang-Gwi, he explained, is cursed to serve the very tiger that took its life. It becomes a ghostly slave, its will bound to the beast's hunger. The spirit is sent ahead of the tiger, a lure to draw unsuspecting travelers into the predator's path. It might mimic the cry of a lost child, the voice of a loved one, or, as their village knew too well, the sound of a drum. The spirit's purpose is to find a new victim for the tiger. Only by doing so, by leading another to the same horrific fate, can the Chang-Gwi hope to be freed from its servitude. It is a cycle of death and damnation, a curse that feeds on human life. The villagers listened, their faces etched with dread. They had heard the tale before, but each time the drums echoed from the forest, the old words carried a fresh and terrifying power. The elder spoke of the signs, the sudden chill in the air, the unsettling silence of the birds, and the mournful song that sometimes followed the drumming. He warned them to never answer a voice from the woods at night, to never follow an unfamiliar sound. The Chang-Gwi was a deceiver, a master of trickery. It used the memories and desires of its victims against them, weaving a web of illusion to ensnare their souls and deliver them to the waiting tiger. This was the source of their fear. It wasn't just a ghost story, it was a manual for survival. The legend was a shield, forged from the tragedies of the past. The rules were simple and absolute, passed down through generations. Stay within the village bounds after sunset. Never travel alone through the forest. And above all, when the drums of Chang-Gwi begin their nightly rhythm, you must ignore them. You must fill your ears with other sounds, with songs of joy and prayers for the dawn. To listen too closely was to invite the curse into your heart, to let the tiger's slave begin its insidious work of luring you toward a terrible end. While the other villagers trembled in fear, a young woman named Suwa lay on her sleeping mat, her mind adrift in a different kind of terror. Suwa was known for her quiet curiosity, her tendency to watch the world with an intensity that made others uneasy. She did not fear the forest. She felt a strange kinship with its ancient, silent ways. But the drums affected her differently. They did not just instill fear. They called to something deep within her. As the village held its breath, Suwa closed her eyes and fell into a recurring dream, a vision that was both beautiful and terrifying. The dream was a world of mist and moonlight, a clearing deep within the woods she had never seen. In the heart of this dream clearing, a man stood alone. He was dressed in the simple, rough garments of a commoner, his face obscured by shadows. But as he moved, moonlight would catch on his features, revealing something startling. His canines were long and sharp, like the fangs of a great tiger. They were not monstrous, but sorrowful, as if they were a mark of a deep and abiding pain. He did not speak. Instead, he sang. His voice was a low, mournful melody that carried no words, only a profound sense of loss and injustice. It was a song that seemed to pull at the very strings of Suwa's soul, a lament that resonated with a sadness she couldn't explain. The song was the most powerful part of the dream. It was more haunting than the tiger fangs, more resonant than the eerie drumming that bled into her waking world. The melody was intertwined with the rhythm of the spectral drums, as if the song was the ghost's true voice and the drums were merely its desperate heartbeat. Suwa felt an overwhelming urge to understand the melody, to learn its silent words. In her dream, she would try to step closer to the singing man, but the mist would thicken and the ground would turn to soft mud, holding her back. She was an observer, trapped just beyond the reach of his sorrow. She would awaken with a gasp, the phantom melody still echoing in her ears. The real drums from the forest would have faded with the approach of dawn, but the man's song lingered. Suwa knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was the true voice of Chang-Gwi. The elders spoke of a lure, a trick to lead people to their doom. But what she heard in her dreams was not deception. It was a raw, unfiltered cry of anguish. It was the sound of a soul that was not trying to enslave another, but was begging to be heard, to be understood before it was condemned. Driven by the haunting melody from her dreams, Suwa sought out the village's oldest records, scrolls kept by the magistrate that were brittle with age and dust. She also spoke to the most ancient woman in the village, a shaman whose memory stretched back further than anyone else's. From these fragmented sources, a different story began to emerge, a history hidden beneath the layers of the frightening legend. The tale of Chang-Gwi, she discovered, was not just about a random victim. It was about a specific man, a slave who had served a cruel and powerful noble who once ruled this valley. The noble was a man of immense wealth and unspeakable cruelty, known for treating his servants as less than human. This slave, whose name had been lost to time, was a musician of remarkable talent. He could play the drum and sing with a voice that could soothe a crying child or stir the hearts of warriors. The noble, however, was a jealous master. He forbade the slave from playing or singing, claiming the beautiful sounds for himself alone. The slave was often beaten for humming a simple tune while he worked. His music was his soul, and the noble sought to crush it, to own every part of him. The true horror, Suwa learned, was not a random tiger attack. The noble, in a fit of rage over a perceived slight, had the slave beaten and left for dead at the edge of the forest, a deliberate offering to the great striped cat that roamed there. The tiger that killed the slave was no ordinary animal. The shaman whispered that it was a spirit beast, an ancient guardian of the mountain. By devouring the slave, the tiger also consumed the injustice that clung to his soul. But it was the noble spirit, not the tiger's, that was the true source of the curse. When the cruel noble eventually died, his corrupt and hateful spirit was too heavy with sin to pass on. It fused with the memory of his final, most terrible act. The noble spirit became the metaphorical tiger, and the slave's soul, the Chang-Gwi, was bound to serve him in death as he had in life, forever cursed to reenact the noble's cruelty. The drumming, Suwa realized, was not the lure. It was the slave's act of defiance. The song was his spirit crying out against the eternal bondage. The legend had become twisted over time, warped by fear. The villagers feared the slave's ghost, the Chang-Gwi, but the true malevolence came from the unseen master, the noble's lingering spirit that still demanded servitude. The Chang-Gwi was not a willing accomplice in a cycle of death. He was the first and most enduring victim, trapped in a nightmare orchestrated by the man who had destroyed him in life and now enslaved him in death. His ghostly existence was a constant, tormented struggle for freedom. The drums continued their nightly serenade, and well, a new, more terrifying phase of the haunting began. The fear in the village curdled from a general anxiety into a sharp, personal dread. People began to vanish. It started with a woodcutter who had ventured too close to the forest's edge at dusk, chasing a stray goat. He never returned. His axe was found leaning against a pine tree, but there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, only this eerie stillness in the air where he was last seen. The villagers whispered that Chang-Gwi had claimed him, that he had been led to the tiger and was now doomed to become a ghost himself. A few weeks later, a young woman who was known for her beautiful singing voice disappeared from her own garden. She had been humming a folk tune while tending her vegetables as twilight fell. Her family found her basket overturned, the freshly picked greens scattered on the earth. Of the woman, there was no trace. The only thing left behind was a faint echo, a sorrowful melody that seemed to hang in the air for a moment before dissolving into the night. It was the same song Suwa heard in her dreams, the wordless lament of the man with tiger fangs. The village was gripped by a cold panic. The ghost was no longer just a sound, it was a silent thief. The disappearances were marked by an unnerving lack of violence. There were no screams, no signs of attack. People simply ceased to be. It was as if they had heard a call that no one else could hear and had walked willingly into the mist. With each vanishing, the presence of Chang-Gwi's song became more distinct. After a lonely widower vanished from his porch, several neighbors swore they heard the ghost's melody weaving through the sound of the drums, a clear and heartbreaking tune that spoke of profound loneliness. The song was not a threat. It was an invitation to share in its sorrow, and honestly, it seemed some were unable to resist its pull. The village began to shrink, not just in numbers but in spirit. Laughter became a rare commodity. The normally bustling market grew quiet. The paths between houses felt wider and emptier. Fear was a constant companion, sitting with families at their dinner tables and lying with them on their sleeping mats. The villagers felt like they were being hunted, but their predator was a feeling, a sound, a sorrow so deep it could pull a person right out of the world. The silence left behind by the vanished was more terrifying than any scream, a void that was steadily growing, threatening to swallow the entire village whole. Suhwa could no longer stand by while her village was consumed by a fear she believed was misplaced. The disappearances, the sorrowful song, it all pointed to the truth she had uncovered. The spirit was not a monster, it was a prisoner. One evening, as the first tentative beats of the drum sounded from the forest, she made a decision. She would not hide. She would not stuff rags in her ears. She would follow the sound. Slipping out of her family's home, she wrapped a dark cloak around her shoulders and walked toward the tree line, her heart a frantic drum in her own chest, matching the rhythm from the woods. The forest at night was a different world. The familiar paths of daytime were gone, replaced by a labyrinth of shadows and strange shapes. The air grew cold, and the scent of damp earth and pine filled her senses. The drumming grew louder, more defined, guiding her steps. It was not coming from one spot, but seemed to move ahead of her, leading her deeper into the woods. She pushed aside low-hanging branches heavy with dew, her feet sinking into the soft blanket of fallen needles. She was afraid, but her curiosity and a strange sense of duty was stronger. She had to see the face of this ghost, to hear his song without the filter of a dream. After what felt like hours of walking, she came to a small, misty clearing, illuminated by a sliver of moon. It was the place from her dreams, and there in the center stood the figure of a man. His form wavered, translucent, like smoke caught in a moonbeam. She could see the faint outline of the trees through his body. As she watched, he raised his head, and she saw them, the mournful tiger fangs glowing faintly. He was not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on some distant, unseen point of sorrow. Then he began to sing. The melody filled the clearing, a sound of pure, undiluted grief that made the very air vibrate with sadness. Suwa did not recoil. She stood her ground, listening. The song told a story without words. It spoke of a life of servitude, of stolen music, of a brutal, unjust death. It cried out against an eternal chain, a curse that forced it to serve its tormentor even beyond the grave. This was Chang-Gwi, not a monster, not a lure for a hungry tiger, but the soul of the slave, trapped in his final moments of agony. Suwa felt a wave of profound empathy wash over her. She understood now that the villagers who had disappeared had not been taken by malice, but had been drawn in by a shared sorrow, their own loneliness resonating with the ghost's powerful lament. The village elder, desperate to end the terror, decided that the time for hiding was over. He announced that they would perform the ancient ritual of banishment. It was a dangerous ceremony, meant to drive away a powerful spirit using noise and fire. That night, the villagers gathered at the edge of the forest, their faces grim and determined in the flickering torchlight. They carried gongs, cymbals, and large drums of their own. Their plan was to confront the ghost sound with a greater, more chaotic noise, to shatter its presence and drive it back into the darkest corners of the mountain from which it came. As the spectral drumming began its slow, mournful beat from within the woods, the elder gave a sharp nod. On his signal, the villagers unleashed a deafening cacophony. The sharp clang of cymbals clashed with the deep boom of the village drums. Men shouted, waving torches whose flames leapt and danced, casting wild, monstrous shadows against the trees. They created a wall of sound, an aggressive, violent assault intended to frighten and repel the spirit. They believed they were fighting a monster, and so they made a monstrous noise, hoping to show the ghost that they were stronger and would not be intimidated any longer. But their ritual had the opposite effect. From the clearing deep in the woods, Suwa watched as the ghost of Chang-Gwi reacted to the villagers' din. The spirit did not flee, it convulsed. Its smoky form writhed as if struck by physical blows. A silent scream seemed to rip through its being, its sorrowful song twisting into a howl of rage and pain. The drumming from the forest intensified, the beat becoming faster, more frantic, more aggressive. It was no longer a lament, it was a war drum. The ghost was not being soothed or banished. It was being enraged, its ancient injustice poked and prodded by the villagers' fearful ignorance. Suwa realized with horror what was happening. The villagers were not fighting the ghost, they were fighting its song. They were trying to silence the one thing that held the key to its freedom. Their ritual was a recreation of the noble's cruelty, an attempt to once again beat the musician into submission, to drown out his voice with violence and noise. The spirit's rage was not born of malice, but of the agony of being so profoundly misunderstood. Chang-Gwi was not the enemy. The true enemy was the curse itself, and the villagers, in their terror, were unknowingly helping to strengthen its chains. In that moment of terrifying clarity, Suwa understood everything. The forbidden song, the melody that the elders warned would lead to ruin, was not a curse. It was a plea. It was the only way the slave spirit knew how to communicate his story, to cry out for the justice he was denied in life. His entire existence was a song, and to hear it was to bear witness to his suffering. The villagers who disappeared were not victims of a monster. They were souls who had listened, truly listened, and their own sorrows had answered the ghost's call. They had joined him in his lonely vigil, becoming echoes in his chorus of grief. The ghost's song was forbidden because it was a song of truth. It held the memory of the cruel noble, of a life stolen, and of a death that was an abomination. For generations, the villagers had chosen to fear the victim rather than confront the story of the oppressor. It was easier to believe in a monstrous tiger's slave than to acknowledge that such cruelty could exist within their own history, perpetrated by a human leader. The legend of the Chang-Gwi had become a convenient way to bury an uncomfortable truth, transforming a plea for justice into a simple tale of a hungry beast and its ghostly servant. As the villagers' chaotic drumming reached a fever pitch, Suhwa knew she had to act. Shouting would be useless. Her voice would be lost in the din. There was only one way to break through the rage and fear, only one language the spirit would understand. She had to answer his song not with noise, but with music. She had to show him that someone had finally heard his true story, that someone was willing to listen to his pain instead of trying to silence it. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was firm. She would not let this cycle of misunderstanding continue. Taking a deep breath, Suwa turned to face the tormented spirit. She ignored the threatening sounds from the edge of the forest and focused only on the ghost before her. She opened her mouth, not to scream or to pray, but to sing. The melody that had haunted her dreams now flowed from her lips. It was a fragile sound at first, a thin thread of music against the tapestry of rage. She sang the wordless lament, pouring all the empathy and understanding she felt into the notes. She was no longer just an observer. She was becoming a part of the song herself, offering her voice as a testament to his long-ignored suffering. As Suwa's voice rose, clear and steady, a profound change swept through the clearing. The raging spirit of Chang-Gwi stilled. Its tormented form ceased its writhing, and its head slowly turned toward her. The frantic, angry drumming from the forest faltered, the rhythm slowing, softening. For the first time, the ghost was not alone in its song. Someone was answering its call, not with fear or violence, but with compassion. The spirit's glowing tiger fangs seemed to lose their sharpness, and its eyes, which had been voids of pain, focused on her with a dawning sense of recognition. He had been heard. Encouraged, Suwa sang louder, her voice weaving a harmony with the ghost's own mournful tune. It became a duet, a shared expression of sorrow and release. The spirit of Chang-Gwi slowly raised a translucent hand, not to harm, but as if conducting their shared melody. His own song changed, the notes of anguish softening into a tone of acceptance and gratitude. Together, their voices filled the forest, overpowering the fading, chaotic noise of the villagers. The song was no longer a plea for justice. It had become the granting of it. It was an acknowledgement of a life that mattered, a story that was finally being told correctly. The curse was woven from injustice and silence. Suwa's song, an act of pure empathy, was the force that unraveled it. As their duet reached its final lingering note, the spirit of Chang-Gwi began to fade. Its smoky form grew thinner, more transparent. The sorrowful tiger fangs dissolved, and for a fleeting moment, Suwa saw the face of a simple man, a musician, and on his lips was the faint trace of a peaceful smile. With a final silent nod of gratitude, the spirit dissolved completely, disappearing into the moonlight like morning mist burning away in the sun. The curse was broken. The forest fell silent. The oppressive drumming was gone, replaced by the gentle, natural sounds of the night. The village was finally quiet, the air no longer heavy with dread. When Suwa returned, the villagers looked at her with awe and confusion. Their ritual failed, but their terror lifted. The disappearances stopped. But the story remained, changed forever. Suwa became the keeper of the song, not as a forbidden curse, but as a memorial. It was a quiet reminder that the deepest wounds are healed not by being silenced, but by being heard. And the village learned that a song of sorrow, if sung with compassion, could bring not a curse, but peace to a lost soul.